The Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke chapter 14, beginning at verse 1. Glory to you, Lord Jesus Christ. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honour, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honour, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host, and the host, who invited both of you, may come and say to you, "Give this person your place," and then in disgrace you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honoured in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbours, in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, and you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, always, our rock, our Redeemer. Amen. Please be comfortable. Can I let you in on a little secret? Somebody has made sure that I don't forget Jesus is always with us. And we've got these little miniature Jesus that have been popping up all over the place. And it has been such a joy to me and a little whimsical bit of fun. I do know who it is. And what a joy. And it was just such a lovely encouragement, and just that reminder that that I'm seen and Jesus is here, and and what we do is a shared life, and we're always looking for Jesus amongst us. And so I just spotted Jesus there in the lectern, and I thought I would share that joy with you. Because we do our lives together. That's the whole point. It's the whole point of this story today, isn't it? Oh, my images are not up in the sermon, are they? No, I did not put them in. That's okay. I think it will be okay without them. So, the gospel could stand on its own, couldn't it? It's just such a beautiful reading. If I were to say, let's spend 5 minutes just thinking about it today, we would take a lifetime's worth of wisdom from Jesus in that moment. But you do actually give me a living allowance to come and teach you, so let's actually unpack it a little bit and give the story a little bit of context. So I want to begin with a little reflection I had when I was in my early 20s, which was some time ago now. Garth and I went to a lot of weddings. I don't know if you had that period in your life when everyone of your age got married. Back then, we're talking early 90s, it was a time where formal seating plans were still the thing. And you had the rectangle table of the bride and the groom and the bridal party at the front, and they were all in their finery, and then you had tables and people had place settings, and you sat where the family decided you would sit. So you usually had your bridal party, and then you'd have your close family, bride's family, groom's family, close friends, and then as you got further back, you kind of had people who were a little bit more distant to the bride and the groom. There was usually a table of troublemakers at the weddings I went to, which was not where I was placed, obviously. There was a table of obligation invites, we kind of noticed. We would talk about this at weddings. I was at the spud table, you know, the invitation that we had to make for people we didn't really want there. And then we would always wonder, actually, are we on the spud table? I'm sure it didn't really exist, the spud table, but that was our legend at the time. And I remember once Garth and I went to a wedding and we switched the places because at the table, because we were placed on the opposite side of a large table of the only people we knew at this wedding, and we assumed it was a mistake, and boy, were we roundly chastised for switching the places by the groom's mum, because she had put us next to some friends who did not speak English, because she thought we would keep them entertained and communicate with them. I'm not sure that we would have been any help, but we were certainly told, we had done the wrong thing. And you don't want to stuff up etiquette at a wedding, do you? It's a little bit more relaxed these days. Young people may not fully appreciate quite what it was like back then, but I think most people who get that sense, you stick to the etiquette at these events. And so we get this sense from the gospel reading today that the Pharisees were similarly particular about order and honour and your place and whereabouts on the table you got to sit, about getting things right. And that was culturally wider as well. Now, it is very tempting or very easy to stereotype the Pharisees, according to the harsh judgment and the conflicts we read in Scripture. But we get just such a narrow window of who this people was from those stories. The stories are there to tell us about Jesus, not to give us a comprehensive view of who the Pharisees were. Today, we just read that Jesus was invited to the home of a Pharisee and accepted it. And so that should give us our first question, okay, so what's actually happening here? And it was on the Sabbath, and he joins the Pharisee for a meal. The ancient historian Josephus writes that the Pharisees had the multitude on their side. We don't often think about that. They weren't terribly unpopular, potentially. Like Jesus, the Pharisees were teaching parables. That was the way they taught. They wrestled with living the law of Moses, but understood that it had to be adapted to the world in which they now found themselves, which was very different from the world that the first Israelites inhabited. You can see how Jesus speaks powerfully into that tradition, why they may have been curious about him, even if his message about how to live now was challenging. The Pharisees were a group that expected a Messiah. They waited with hope for God to come and restore Israel. And they expected a Messiah that would have some political and military might, a king like David. They looked for God's kingdom to come. They were hopeful that God was coming to put things right, just as Jesus proclaimed God's kingdom was near. And they believed there would be a resurrection of the dead, something that Jesus spoke to as well. Now, this belief put them at odds with other Jewish groups. There was a lot of tussling and wrestling with how do we live as God's people in this Roman world. Some groups expected the future of Israel to come out of the temple, to be led by the priests, to actually come through that way. And those groups denied there would even be a Messiah. They denied that there would be a resurrection. So in Jewish life, there were factions and debates, because the beliefs shaped how they lived. Their beliefs shaped how they believed their community should be organised politically and socially. And so, with that in mind, it's understandable that when you gather for lunch, you gather with the people who think like you. And you retreat into that space and talk about all the things that are happening and what might be. So when Jesus accepted this invitation, and along with a few other clues we get particularly in Luke, it seems that there isn't a simple rejection or antagonism that we might imagine between the Pharisees and Jesus. And as we read the parable today, as Jesus shares at that meal with them, Jesus offers a correction, but not a sharp rebuke or a rejection. Jesus actually offers a moment of teaching that is not unlike the teaching he gave his own disciples. It's really important. It's really important because the Pharisees show us that it is so possible to get things very, very wrong with the very best of intentions. We can learn from the Pharisees today, particularly when we see that they are less like opponents and more like us. So at this particular meal, we know that there actually was present a person with a physical ailment. We skipped over a bit in the reading today. When Jesus challenged those who attended about whether it was lawful to heal on the Sabbath, we know from last week this is an ongoing dispute and was met in silence. They waited. He went on to heal the man of his abnormal swelling. And we can imagine that his status in that world went up. Jesus then follows on from that event with this very sound advice that he offers that could save you from a very embarrassing faux pas at a dinner. And the text echoes advice that's written in the book of Proverbs. And so in Proverbs, chapter 25, verses 6 to 7, we read this: "Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among his great men. It is far better for him to say to you, 'Come up here,' than for him to humiliate you before his nobles." This is good wisdom, isn't it? But Jesus is offering more than wise counsel. Although, having listened to this would have avoided me getting in trouble with my friend's mum that time, right? Luke tells us this story is a parable. And when we think about parables, we've got to go deeper. We've got to wrestle with it. There is depths to this we need to try to unpack. And Jesus watched the people jostling for position amongst themselves. And that is what sparked this particular story. Now, those people knew full well their place in that society. What Jesus is doing here is unsettling their expectation that that's how God's table might be organised. That a heavenly banquet might look just like the one they order for themselves. So the thing about this story is he's talking about a wedding feast. And this was a really common metaphor for God's kingdom to come. It was used in the Jewish world at that time. And straight away, those people listening to this story would have known Jesus was talking about more than where they were, but was actually talking about the kingdom to come. Who is honoured in God's kingdom? Who gets an invitation? Who is forgotten? Who gets kicked out? Who is on the spud table? Who's sitting by the toilets? Who's nearest the buffet? Jesus then follows on from this particular parable with what is one of those really rare moments if we get a clear instruction from Jesus directly. He tells the host what the host should have done if he was looking towards God's kingdom. Include, favour, and honour those who cannot repay you. Those who don't build on your image or status. Those who have not had the opportunity or education to have developed the same sort of piety that you and your friends have developed. The same piety that you have begun to convince yourself is the way to godliness. He said to the one who had invited him directly, so it's no longer a parable, a direct address to the host. When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbours, in case they might invite you in return, and you would be repaid. You'll get your rewards on earth from doing that, but that is not how you will earn honour with God. You can't earn honour with God. Not in that way. It's so common for us to invite people into our lives who are similar to us, to share meals and friendships and our networks. Our table becomes a place of distinction, a place of honour. And I deliberately use the word distinction because we become distinct from one another. There are consequences we might not imagine when we narrow the people we are friends with and we socialise with in this way. Now, many of you will know the story about in 1965. Do people know what happened in the Regatta Hotel? There is a bar at the Regatta Hotel. When you're there, it's Merle's Bar. So Merle Thornton and Rosalie Bogner famously changed themselves to the public bar in the Regatta because women were not allowed to drink there. Now, they didn't do that for fun. They didn't do that because they had a desperate need to surround themselves in smoke and drink 4X. If you see the photos, they look very beautiful and very classy. Not that it's not classy, I love a good beer myself. These women realised that they were missing out on really important conversations. Women were in the workforce, they were working alongside men, and then at the end of the day, they literally would be stopped at the door of the bar where the conversation continued. In those behind the scenes conversations, friendships form and deepen, conversations about work happen, decisions get made, background builds, and they were excluded. They couldn't contribute to it, and they didn't know about it. It was not good for them. It was also not good for their workplaces, who were missing out on the contributions of staff members they chose because of their talents and skills, and the workforce divided. Everyone was poorer for the distinction. The Pharisees' table was poorer for the distinction. Our church will be poorer for the distinction. And so Jesus says to the Pharisees, yes, read the law in a way that works in the world you find yourself in, yes. Order yourselves for today. Look for the kingdom to come, yes. Look for the Messiah, yes. Look for the resurrection, yes. Be assured you will be rewarded. But get the heart, the order of the kingdom right. Look to the one who leads the kingdom, because otherwise you might well find yourselves crashing down, from your imagined place of honour. It's not difficult to see that the respected and well-educated, those with wealth and legal training and the ability to argue that was the Pharisaic way, you can understand it would be very easy for them to begin to believe that they were as honoured in God's eyes as they were when they walked down the street. It's all they've known. It would be easy to believe they were superior to the poor. It is easy to believe that they were more honoured than those who did not have the opportunity to study or practice the law or develop the patterns of piety that they had. And we still see that belief today. It's a really natural human reaction. Tom Wright puts it like this: they were so eager to maintain their own places at the top table, so much tussling for it, that they could not grasp God's great design to stand the world on its head. Pride, notoriously, is the great cloud which blots out the sun of God's generosity. Pride, notoriously, is the great cloud which blots out the sun of God's generosity. And Tom goes on to say this: if I reckon I deserve to be favoured by God, not only do I declare that I don't need God's grace, mercy and love, but I imply that those who don't deserve it shouldn't have it. Not only do I declare that I don't need God's grace because I've earned my place, I imply that those who don't deserve it, who haven't earned it, shouldn't have God's grace. What happens outside of work, what happens outside of the synagogue, what happens outside of our Sunday service matters. The Pharisees had the best of intentions. They just had the promise of God's kingdom very, very, very wrong. Do we? Jesus turned things upside down. Jesus is turning things upside down. Jesus hung out with all the wrong sorts and helps people get a seat at the table. Jesus values the company of those the world would leave behind. Do we? We all need God's grace. None of us deserve it. We've got nothing to prove and everything to gain. In the name of Christ.